So welcome to Deploying Operating Systems with System Center 2012 Configuration Manager. Now, there's a few things we need to do before deploying operating systems. First thing is actually on our distribution point, we've made sure we've installed Windows deployment services on our distribution point. And then within the distribution point configuration in the Pixie tab, we make sure we enable that Pixie support for clients. Do we want to respond to unknown clients? And then if we want to use a password. And if users already have a device assigned to them, we can automatically approve that. So we've made sure that WDS is installed on the distribution point. We've enabled that distribution point for Pixie. And the next thing we actually need to do is create a client package for the configuration manager. Now, although it seems to come with two automatically, they're not actually usable. So we need to go and create a new one based on the template. We select Configuration Manager Client. We want to always obtain the source files from a source folder. So I'm actually going to go and select that. I'm going to pass it the name of the network path. So that's going to be my SCCM server, the SMS, and then your site name share client. And then I would click next. Now I've already created it, but you would click next, and notice I have that. And you can tell it's not the built-in one because it has a version 5. So now we have a client package that can deploy the SCCM 2012 client. Now I've actually already created some images and installers on this, but I'm going to create some new ones. Now the first thing we actually have to do is add an operating system installer. Now an operating system installer is basically the content of the Windows Media CD. So you've basically taken the ISO and extracted it out to a location. So you can see here on this one, I've got a library share. I have my ISOs, and I've expanded out Windows 7 Ultimate SP1 64-bit. So I'm going to select that folder. And what it's now going to do is I can give it a name, a version, a comment, etc. It's now going to bring in the entire content of that installer into SCCM. Because this is what I need to do if I want to capture my own image. Now you're probably thinking, well, look, there's already a WIM file on the image in the media. Can't I just directly import that in? Well, you could, but then when you deploy that through SCCM, it'll actually write to the D drive of the computer instead of C, so it's not ideal. So what I'm actually doing now is I'm just distributing that installer out to my distribution points. Apologies, I should have dragged that over. So obviously I have to have that distributed. I can go and check on that distributing status through the monitoring workspace content, and we can see here the currently size is 0. It's in progress. So it's going to take a little while to basically replicate the entire source of that OS image over to my distribution point. Now, there are a few other things I need to do, so while that's busy doing that, I can obviously add drivers, etc. My boot images, I need to make sure both of these boot images are deployed to a distribution point. And also, again, the customization, I want to enable command line support. So I can press F8 during a deployment, and I can actually bring up a command prompt, look at troubleshooting and the TS log. Also, I want to make sure this is deployed from the Pixie service point. You saw that in the properties right there. And that basically makes it deploy to the remote install folder of Windows deployment services. So that's very, very important to select that. Make sure that's selected, deploy from the Pixie service point. And then I've actually got that deployed to both of my distribution points. And you do want to make sure you do deploy both the x86 and the x64. Even if you have all 64-bit clients, still deploy the x86 version. It is used in some scenarios, and you'll probably see Pixie failures if you don't have that x86 deployed. So that's still going through, that's still deploying, and that's chugging away. So there are a few other actions. I'm actually going going to create a new task sequence to use that Windows 7 installer and capture my own reference image. This will create my own WIM file. So I'm going to do a build and capture Windows 7 basically. I select the boot image I want to use, so 64-bit OS, I can use a 64-bit boot image. I select the installer, so that was that Windows 7 that I just imported in. Which edition from within there. I should enter a product key here, but for the sake of the video I'm not. I'll just manually put that in later. A workgroup is fine for this because obviously we're going to sysprep this guy and deploy it out later, so I probably don't need to join a domain. This is where I'm going to set that configuration manager package I created, so that's the special one I did. If you try to use any of the built-in ones, it will not work. If I want to add patches, add applications, sysprep is part of Windows 7 and Vista, so I don't need to specify anything in terms of where sysprep is. Again, a description, and the next thing is where I want to capture the actual image to. So this is just a file share that whatever account I specify has got write privileges to. And I can change this name later, this is not a huge deal. Specify the account that has that write access, so I'm, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to use the domain admin account. Again, you don't need to be an administrator, you just need to write access to a share. So now I have a task sequence that what it basically do is it will allow a machine to boot over the network, it will install Windows 7 from that installer media, and then once it's installed it will run sysprep and it will capture the content, so it's still in progress, it will capture that content and write it to that share. So then I will have my own WIM file, and then that image file I can then use to actually deploy it. Again, while we're waiting, there's a few other things we can do. We do need a network access account. So this is when machines that boot over the network, how they can access the file shares, etc., or permissions. So we see I have a network access account, and I created a domain account called SCCM deploy that has sort of the access to SCCM. It's just a domain user account. Doesn't need anything special. If I want to customize, there's a default client settings container. You can create your own ones. You can see here I can quickly change the organization name that's deployed. It says Software Center, but it actually goes throughout all of SCCM. So my OS deployments and everything else. So it should be nearly done by now. Give this a second to complete. This is just really, I've already created my boundaries. You need to make sure you create boundaries, which can be like your AD sites. You need to add boundaries to a boundary group because clients become members of boundary groups in SCCM 2012. So I added that boundary to a boundary group. And then when I have my distribution points, what I can actually do is link my distribution points to a boundary group. So what that actually does is it makes something simpler so that if I deployed software to machines, for example, in a boundary group, it'll automatically deploy it to those distribution point groups and all distribution points within it. So it's just some little configurations we can perform. Okay, it looks like we're actually finally done. Okay, so we can actually go and test this thing out. So I have my task sequence. The next thing I actually have to do is deploy it. So I'm actually going to deploy it to all systems. Now, this is dangerous. I'm not suggesting you would do this in any kind of production environment. You would want to deploy something like this, that's basically wiping a machine and capturing an image, to make sure it's not required. Firstly, most important thing, make it available to Boot Media and Pixie. But again, I'm doing it to all systems because this is my lab. It's an isolated network, and I'm not making it required. But you would really want to create a special collection, import in a computer object, type in the MAC address of the machine you're using for this capturing process, and deploy to that machine only. Do not deploy this sort of build and capture to all machines. You could easily wipe out your entire environment. So big safety warning, special alert. Take care on that one. So now I've offered it out, I've deployed it. So now what I can actually do is I have a Pixie test machine. So this is a virtual machine that's got a legacy network adapter which enables it to boot via Pixie. And so this will boot over the network. And I'm going to have to press F12 because I haven't replaced it with the no F12 ROM. You can do that. You can go into the remote install folder and use the no F12, but I want to press F12, especially with what I'm doing. So it's booting. You can see it's connected to the configuration manager server, that Pixie. It's downloading. So Lab 4 is the initial boot environment. Then once it's finished doing that, it will actually check my machine, what advertisements apply to me. And if I'd selected to a password, it would prompt me for a password. I didn't. Now I've left this as like the default background, but you can very easily change that in the properties of the boot images in that customization tab. You probably saw how you can use a customized background. So you just create a bitmap file and pass that into that customization tab. It will recreate the boot.wim, and then you just update your distribution points, and then that customization will take effect. So this is IT organization because I never updated my Windows PE environment after I set that default client settings to my organization. But once I select a task sequence, you'll actually see my org name take effect. Again, if I just now updated my boot images, I would see my Saviltech IT name in there. So no password because I didn't set one. You can see all the task sequences I created. So I'm doing my build and capture Windows 7 SP1. And watch what it's going to do. It's going to partition the disks, and then it's going to take some time. It's going to wipe the disk. It's going to apply the operating system. So it's basically running a full OS installation. So you can see it downloading notice it's not just downloading a WIM file, it's actually downloading all of the various media. So I'm skipping bits of time in this one. So it downloaded all the parts, it installed the OS, now it's running through the setup Windows configuration manager, client, deployment. That's actually, you can see it doing the actual installation behind the scenes. So it's not just laying down a WIM file, this is doing a full Windows installation. I can customize this. Obviously I'm jumping around. It would install any updates. Windows boots, as it normally does, performing all the standard setup stuff. Now this is prompting me for product key because I didn't put it in the task sequence. Remember, I didn't want to type that in. Obviously if I had have just put in maybe my KMS key or MAC or whatever, I wouldn't have got prompted for that. That was just because I didn't want to type in a product key. Now we're going through and we're doing the base SCCM configuration manager client. So again, that's using that package we created. And at this point, if you try to use one of those built-in packages, this will fail. I think it was a 8007-0002 error you'll get. So that means, hey, you're trying to use the built-in configuration manager. I did that the first time. You'll trawl through the logs and eventually you'll work it out. It doesn't work. So just out of interest, so I mean, if you do have issues, and you may well hit problems with this depending on what you're trying to do, there is the SMSTS.log file that's created locally on this box during the task sequence deployment. So you could press that F8 because we customized the Windows PE. It will bring a command prompt, and from that we can actually go and look at the file system, look at the SMSTS.log file. You can call CM trace to actually get a nice view of the log file. and troubleshoot that way. If the Pixie boot was failing, then you would look on the SCCM folder. See, it's running sysprep now. If the Pixie boot was failing, you would look in the C program files, Microsoft configuration. Sorry. That's where CM trace is. To actually look at the log file, it would be C program files, SMS_ your site, logs, smspixie.log. And that would obviously give you a read. So I now have a WIM file. Happy days. And you can see I actually copied the log file there from earlier when I was having problems. I can now move that WIM file to a different location. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. It's still capturing it. So you can see actually creating that WIM file. It's growing in size. I should have guessed that 40 megabytes for Windows 7 would be a very slim installation. Come back, it's finished. I'm now at nearly 3 gigs, which is a lot more realistic. I'm now going to move that into my standard location for my WIMs. This is a Windows 7 2008 R2 I captured earlier. And now I have my own WIM file. I could have added apps, I could have customized this, whatever I wanted to do. Now I can actually import in my own customized WIM file that I created into SCCM. Just drag that over. So it's now known to SCCM. Again, I now need to distribute that to make it available on a distribution point. Again, if you ever forget to put anything on a distribution point, obviously your deployments will fail. It has to be able to find the images, the client packages, and everything else to be able to deploy these things. Now I have my WIM file. I can actually go and create a task sequence to do the deployment. So I can actually go create a new task sequence. This time it's actually install an existing image. I give it a name, so Windows 7, Ultimate, x64, SB1. Description, I pick the boot image. So again, I'm picking the x64, 64-bit, but I could use the x86 as well. It does actually work. So now I'm going to select that brand new image I created. I've only got one image in it. I would type in a product key here, definitely, and I'm going to do that after the screen recording's done. This time I want to join a domain as part of this. Again, I give it a credential to join the domain. Now again, I've been lazy here. I'm using domain admin. Don't do this in any kind of real environment. I don't want the domain admin account. You can just delegate a particular account to have permissions to join the machine, so it doesn't have to be a domain admin. Again, I'm going to use my config manager package I created, not the built-in ones. If I wanted to deploy this to an existing OS like Vista, I could use USMT to capture all the information. For me, I'm not doing that. I'm only doing this to brand new machines over Pixie boot. But if you did plan to do upgrades, you would leave that USMT in place. And all you do is you download USMT, it's part of Wake. You copy it in and create a package, very easy to do. So now I have my new task sequence. I can go and customize things. I can change the name. I can set custom text for the progress notification if I wanted to. Now I'm going to actually deploy that. So again, I'm doing it to all systems. You would probably want to be more careful of this in any kind of production environment. Definitely not required. Remember what this is doing. When the machine boots and boots over Pixie, it will wipe the machine. So again, be very careful to how you use this. there is an all unknown machines collection. I could sort of deploy it to that one if it's only brand new machines. So I'm showing the task sequence progress, really standard stuff here. We'll go next. And we're done. See if I've actually got that image file over to the distribution point yet. So it's not yet, it's still copying over. Magic of editing, it's done. And now, back to my Pixie test machine. I've wiped it away to a clean state. I basically cleaned SCCM, so it doesn't know about this machine anymore. Again, I'm going to boot this guy over the network. Pressing F12. Downloading the boot WIM. This is the Windows PE environment. Again, no password. This time I can actually do the deploy Windows 7. And now it's just going to go through and wipe the disk, deploy Windows 7, install the latest patches, and basically I'm done at this point. I can deploy this out en masse. Downloads the WIM file, applies the WIM file to the volume, and this will take some time, obviously chugging away. Now it's doing a search for network device driver library that I could have imported in. Again, checking the configuration manager client, any requirements it's going to install automatically. It's making it part of my SCCM site. It joined the domain. That's going to shut down. When it boots up, going to go through that standard sort of initial out-of-box experience because I sys prepped it. Doing the last few customizations of that box. And then once this is finished, so notice this time I didn't have to touch anything apart from the F12 initially. I didn't actually have to do anything. It's completed and I have a Windows 7 fully built domain joined desktop. Hope that was useful. Control delete, I see the domain. And that's it. I've deployed an OS with SCCM. Thank you.